This recording is on the subject matter prison. Prison, in a sense, that a limited place which constricts the capacities of both the spirit and the physical capacities. Now, the reason I'm making this recording is because Abdu'l-Baha speaks specifically, he says the worst prison of our spirit, our soul, is our own self. The self, which is, if we're going to define self, it would be something like the accumulated relations, conditionings, desires, and wants throughout our lives is termed the self. Now, the reason we can identify self is not because we are given a complete definition, not at all. But we can face the opposite of self, or selfish, which is selfless. So when it's selfless, now it's a bit easier to find out what really entails self. In selflessness, we can clearly see what should not be there if you're going to call it selfless. And if it's there, it's to some degree manifests selfishness. Now, as far as the spiritual side of man, we know that self limits the expression, the spirit's expression in our lives, in our physical lives. And this self, it's been tagged as a prison, the prison of self. Abdu'l-Baha speaks of that. In addition, there is a different angle to look and come up with the same conclusion or understanding, and that is in the cases of some psychological disorders or psychiatric diseases, such as Alzheimer, or other illnesses such as bipolar disorder, severe depression, manic depression. All of these, in my opinion, they reflect the same problem, which is when our inner strength, our inner powers are imprisoned by our bodies, and they just cannot fully express themselves. Specifically, this becomes fairly clear in the case of Alzheimer, dementia, and comatose, when somebody cannot physically move. It is so obvious that they have been imprisoned within their body. They are conscious, but the consciousness cannot be expressed externally. So it seems like they have been bound, tied down. Their consciousness has been tied down, so it cannot move, it cannot express itself. I can see that in the cases that have come across of dementia, Alzheimer patients who are suffering. When you look at their eyes, and eyes are very important, they are called the windows to our soul. And when you look at their eyes, the eyes of the patients who are suffering from dementia, Alzheimer, it's expressionless. At the same time, you know that the same person with that expressless eyes, not expressing anything, when we look at their eyes, they are conscious. There are episodes that they come and go. That means their level of consciousness changes. It alters and changes their mood as well. So they could be happy, or even being able to speak a few words. However, later on they go completely dark and mute. Not only they don't speak, they don't have that field of awareness that they had 30 minutes ago. So these changes in mood and level of consciousness is extremely interesting, because in my opinion, the consciousness itself is not affected by the debilitating disease of the body, of the physical body, which brain is included in. Our brain, a central nervous system, included in that. However, consciousness is not essentially limited in itself, but its expression, external expression, is limited, and it's imprisoned, tied down by the disabilities of our physical shells. So notice that the meaning or the use of prison here, prison, is twofold. One, when our consciousness is affected directly. Now, I'm not sure about any of these. These are just, in a way, speculations, but based on rational reasoning, not but based on any beliefs or emotional reactions. But rationally speaking, it seems to be limitations that are imposed on consciousness directly, which I would call that spiritual disease. That could have physical correlation to a sign, to a condition physically, but essentially it's a spiritual disorder. The other meaning of prison is when the consciousness is untouched, but the field of its expression, physical expression, external expression, is drastically limited. It's been reduced, drastically reduced. Now, a question could be raised here that how could consciousness be imprisoned physically? Because consciousness, as far as we understand it, it's beyond material. It's non-physical. Even when we refer to consciousness based on the scientific theories that have been presented recently, within past 10, 15, 20 years, one of them specifically, it refers to what Abdu'l-Baha pointed out. Abdu'l-Baha explained, and we talked about it prior to this recording session, in another recording. Abdu'l-Baha refers to the sympathetic nervous system as the tool or the correlated physical channels that is called common faculty, which bridges our physical senses, the five senses that we have. That's how we perceive the external world, perceive anything actually, and then our inner powers, our spiritual powers, which are basically imagination, reflection, comprehension, and memory, and common faculty is included as a bridge between these two. But common faculty itself essentially is one of the inner powers. Now, this theory that refers or uses the as its main subject, the sympathetic nerves, specifically inside the nerves, the structures that nerves are made of are called microtubules. Now these microtubules are hollow tubes. However, they function quantumly. That means they are not totally physical, and they're not totally non-physical. They're somewhere in between. Now it's very difficult to explain that, but that's how quantum physics is. It's really not understood what it is exactly. It's quite counterintuitive. So it seems like that's what the theory claims, that these microtubules is the site where our consciousness is brought into existence. From wherever it's coming is a non-physical, non-material, but that's where it's produced, at the juncture where these microtubules are interacting with something else that brings about consciousness. Now, this is very limited because, as you notice, microtubules by themselves, they need to be in contact with something else. Now, that something else is not a thing. It's non-physical. But science, being physical science, being material science, is not recognizing anything non-physical. Everything is physical. Anything that could be substantiated by, let's say, scientific method, empirical methodologies. So although fortuitously came up what Abdu'l-Baha referred to by the turn of the century in his talks for the first time, they came up with this. Now, from where doesn't matter, but they have not explored all the surrounding angles and attributes that comes with it, the characteristics that come with this concept. They have only explored so far part of the physical attributes and characteristics. The rest remains to be unknown and untouched. Why? Because we are not simply willing to accept that something that is detected because it carries signs that are detectable by our instruments. Our instruments are the products of our mind, our rational mind. Our rational mind is limited. The instrument of our rational mind are the instrument that are based on a rational mind, and they're detecting those signs that they are able to detect. These tools that we are using, they're limited to an array of signs. Beyond those signs, or if those signs are no longer showing anything, proving that something exists, then those signs, the signs that are new ones, the new signs that are not being detected by our instrument, because our instrument is limited to certain signs, which is in this case physical signs, mass-related signs, matter and energy signs. Anything beyond those, which means anything beyond the physical, anything beyond the material, they're simply non-detectable by the instruments, which is the faculty of intellect that we use in order to understand the physical universe. Beyond the physical universe. Now, it's easy to say beyond the physical universe, and somebody can raise a question and object to it that there is nothing beyond the physical. Well, yes, absolutely right. They are right. There is nothing beyond the physical as long as we are using these instruments, our faculty of intellect, which only detects physical realities, not capable of detecting anything beyond physical realities. Even the non-physicals, which we are familiar with and we know they exist. For example, the values, love, hate, jealousy, these have correlated physical counterparts. However, the cause of these emotions are not physical. But because our mind is not capable of understanding something that is non-physical, what do? We use similes, metaphors, in order to what? To bring them down to the level of the physical. Then we can at least communicate it with somebody else. Otherwise, we cannot. The only way that we can communicate it beyond our faculty of intellect, ability, capacity, is when we communicate heart to heart, which is beyond the limitations and transcends our mental and intellectual capacity, which becomes extremely important here to notice what we just said. Our intellect is an instrument, albeit perfect, for detecting and exploring and discovering realities which are physical. Beyond physical, if there is anything beyond physical, our mind is not capable of detecting. Our intellect is only capable of detecting signs that are physical. Beyond physical, obviously non-physical signs are not detectable by our intellect, which is limited to detecting physical signs. Here, something else steps in. But so far, science has denied its existence, which is another channel to know. Another channel of understanding, which has nothing to do, totally independent of our intellect. Where our intellect stops, cannot go any further, if I can call it, our heart can take over. This is that moments of clarity, that gut feeling, something that you know. First, you cannot trace it back to our intellect. Second, it's an independent packet of knowledge which is completely independent and has no relation whatsoever to our intellect. In fact, when we bring the level of our intellectual activities down to a halt, and it should come to a halt by itself, on its own, then in that state, which we call meditative state, there's certain truth. We become privy of certain truths which are not available to us through our normal, everyday intellectual channel. That's extremely important. Nobody can deny that, because as human beings, we have these moments of clarities every once in a while. That doesn't mean that every moment turns out to be absolutely true. No. Nonetheless, the way we receive these, now it could be filtered on the way by so many biases or conditionings that we have. Nonetheless, they appear to be, at least appear to be, independent of our intellect. We should stop here.